West. This is Kathleen Quinn, the Director of NAPSA. I want to welcome you to today's webinar on the first ever recommended APS minimum program standards. Andy Capart's also on the phone with me. I think all of you know him or know who he is. He's Assistant Director of NAPSA. And we have Paul Needham, who will be presenting the standards. Paul is a program field representative for the Oklahoma Department of Human Services APS training unit. He's the lead trainer and curriculum developer and has been that since 2002. Now get this. He started work with the department in 1979 and has 34 years of experience with APS.
I was 10.
That is really commendable. He conducted his first APS investigation in 1980. He's received a number of awards, the Best of the Best Awards in 2008, the Department Award, Quality Award for his contributions in an APS-related project in 2006, Award for Excellence in both 2002 and 2003 for exemplary service to APS clients, and he has been chairperson to the Elder Abuse Track for the Oklahoma Conference on Aging for their planning committee since 2005. Paul has served in the NAPSA Education Committee for many years, and he has chaired it for the past several years, donating many, many volunteer hours to NAPSA's work. He led the development of these first ever recommended minimum standards for APS program over the course of many months, and he and all the committee members who work so hard on these deserve a lot of kudos and thanks from all of us in the field. To me, it's especially important that these standards have been developed by APS for APS and will be updated as needed by APS as well. Finally, just so you all know, Paul also donates his photographic and computer skills every year by taking literally hundreds of photos at the NAPSA conference and then turning them into a wonderful slideshow complete with music and local scenes. So, Paul, I want to thank you for all your years of hard work and dedication to NAPSA, to APS, and, of course, to Oklahoma APS. And now I think everyone wants to hear you talk about the new standards.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathleen. And I'll tell you, that's way too much information about me. I'm just saying. Guys, it is an honor to be here today and with you all across the country. And I know there's also a good chance we've got some friends from Canada as well online. So thank you guys for being online. The minimum standards.
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
Paul, before you get started, I'm so sorry. Andy asked me to remind everybody that if you have questions, please type them into the message box that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. We have a lot of people signed up for this webinar. It's really like maybe the highest number we've ever had signed up. So we're not going to get to everybody's questions, but we'll certainly do our best. Okay, thanks. Sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, you bet. You bet. Acknowledges for this webinar and for this program standards document that we're going to go through today. Do go to Kathleen and Andy, Mary Coonahan, Lynn Kuntz, and Rebecca McGowan. Their leadership has been tremendous, and the subcommittee chairs with Lori and Krista and Susan. You can't do this work without a lot of people. I did not do these program standards. You see these additional chair committee members there. They did the work on this, and it took us 21 months. It was a long time. We started with a document that was from an outside source, and it worked, but it didn't work, and we ended up just eliminating it completely and doing a complete overhaul and making it a true NAPSA document from NAPSA resources, NAPSA research, NAPSA training to create this document. I want to remind everybody that we will be presenting this in person again with many of these people that were listed there at the conference in Portland, Oregon, October 29th and 30th. Then the Financial Summit on the 31st. But this particular document will also be presented, and we'll be there to visit with you about any questions you may have. Would love to see you there at the conference. I think the presentation for this is on the very first day, on the 29th, that morning, I believe, before noon. So would love to see you at the conference, guys. we started with NAPSA strategic goals and their mission statement. I'm not going to read these to adults. I'm going to have to read enough today. So I hate reading to adults, but you have this part of the document. And so therefore I want to make sure that we mention that. We didn't just start with, well, I wonder what we ought to think about minimum standards. We've had a lot of guidelines from the NAPSA leadership over the years, and just the NAPSA organization itself forming a really good framework about, an ethical framework about what a program standard should really look like. So you have these strategic goals there. You can read them yourselves. I won't read them to you because unfortunately I'm going to be reading way too much today anyway instead of training. The program standards, they're for a purpose. They're not there to tell people what to do and tell you, as we get into it, you'll see that we don't really say, this is how many people you need and this is how long you have to do this and all that. But what it does, hopefully it supports your mission, where you're at, in your state or local government that's administering the APS program where you're at. They do constitute best practice. Regardless of the size or structure of your program and where you're at, whether it be North Dakota, whether it be Tennessee or Texas or California, Colorado, many of those are county-based, and that's the way the programs are run. A lot of different entities run these programs, and of course in Indiana, the program is run through the DA's office, unique in this country, but hopefully it will help all of the entities across the country to provide a standard of best practice that can be presented and hopefully encourage the future development of APS in this country. Notice that we do avoid the direct use of language such as should or must, but they are implied. These are minimum program standards that are being proposed by NAPSA. And the term client, victim, survivor are used interchangeably within this document. Every state has their own terminology when it comes to their code and their laws and their policies. So just so you know, those are used interchangeably here. I prefer the word survivor because domestic violence field and all that, but they are used interchangeably within this document. Obviously, APS is a social service program. State and local governments are the ones who administer them. And in this particular document, we do refer to abuse, neglect, self-neglect, exploitation. We're going to refer to those from now on as abuse. Okay, it just helps when you're writing a document like this that you actually know what you're talking about later on. We will be talking about education principles and training principles in this document. We'll also be talking about principles and program standard principles about adults have the right to be safe. This document the entire document is based on these particular principles that NAPSA has set for years and years and years. That the adults retain their civil and constitutional rights, the right to live as they wish, manage their own finances and contracts, unless the court in your state or principality or area adjudicates otherwise. They do have the right to make decisions, don't conform to our social norms as long as decisions don't harm others, and they have the right to refuse our services, of course. This is talking about coordination under the minimum program standards. If you have the document up yourself, if you have that up on your screen, if you're looking at it, if you've printed it off, if you printed off the PDF, the page number at the bottom, which says page 6 there, that corresponds to the page on the document. So you know where we're at on the document. It only has 14 pages, and we're already on page 6. Seems like we're going fast, but now we're going to get into the meat of the program standards itself. And we'll give you a chance to ask questions at the end of each one of these sections. We will have to, as Kathleen mentioned earlier, we'll have to limit the number of questions just because of time's sake, and we want to leave room at the end of the webinar to answer as many questions as possible. Okay. God, it's hard doing this when I can't see you guys. That's tough for a trainer and tough for you too. but we'll get through it. When it comes to, oops, clicking wrong screen. When it comes to coordination, obviously we do work with other agencies and community partners. So it's mentioned here, you can't do a program standards without noting the fact that there must be coordination between us and other entities within our communities. Okay, that does include domestic violence and sexual assault programs, and aging disability networks, substance abuse service providers, tribal entities. In Oklahoma, for example, we have 39 recognized tribes. Alabama has one federally recognized tribe. So wherever you're at, the different agencies and community partners that you have, we need to coordinate with them in order to better protect our clients, the survivors out there and the victims out there. The goal of these intentional and specific collaborations is to provide comprehensive services to vulnerable adults that need our help, and building on strengths from each one of those community providers in order to provide safety for our vulnerable adults wherever we're served in APS. Obviously, many of us form multidisciplinary teams as needed or required, and that's recommended here as well. Ethical guidelines. NAPSA has developed an APS Code of Ethics. All of the information in this document is guided by those code of ethics. That's one thing I love about this. Like Kathleen said, this is a document that's created for APS by APS, and it really is an APS document. Adult Protective Services, obviously, we promote safety, independence, quality of life. For those persons who are being mistreated or in danger of being mistreated and who are unable to protect themselves. Guiding values within those ethics include every action taken by APS must balance the duty to protect the safety and vulnerability of the adult's right to self-determination, and that balance between safety and self-determination is one of those huge ethical issues that we face every day, of course. Older persons and disabilities who are victims of mistreatment should be treated with honesty, care, and respect. Practice guidelines include, and I'm sorry to have to read this, guys, but it is what it is, and it certainly isn't training, but it is going through the document and gives you a chance to hear and see it, read it yourself, so that if you have questions, you can ask about questions about any one of these areas here. The APS program is guided that emphasize APS personal information being confidential, recognize clients' differences, the cultural values, etc. Honoring the rights of the adult's right to receive information about the choices in a manner that they can understand. Other guidelines, to the best of our ability, to involve the adult as much as possible in our service planning. And service planning is one of the essential parts of the minimum standards program that we're going to be getting to in a few minutes. Focus on case planning that maximizes vulnerable adults' independence. This will be highlighted later on in the document. Least restrictive services. Family and informal support systems first, as long as it is in the best interest of the client. As we well know, many of our abusers are family members, and support systems such as care providers. But as long as it is in the best interest of the client, well, we want to use those informal systems first. Maintain clear and appropriate professional boundaries. Most states have very specific code about that, and should have. In the absence of adults' expressed wishes, support the actions that are in the adult's best interest. Use substitute judgment. In other words, what was their traditional judgment before? What had they done before? And use that information in our decision making for them if they can no longer express that themselves. And do no harm is probably my favorite, because it's not just do no harm, and many people stop at that, and I could preach a little bit on this. I'll try not to. But do no harm does not mean do nothing at all, and that's what APS doesn't do. We just can't do nothing at all. We, in most municipalities, in most states, in most locations, whether it be a county or city service, we are mandated to do investigations. and not just take a report and say, well, that might just make it worse. Guys, this is domestic violence. It's going to get worse if somebody doesn't do something. So the inadequate or inappropriate intervention may be worse than no intervention at all. And that's part of the NAPSA practice guidelines. There's a section, this short section here on evidence-based research. NAPSA and NICP do work well together, and most of the information we have and most of the stuff we're going to talk about here is evidence-based. Most of it comes from our training that has been explored extensively over the last 3 or 4, 5, 6 years as we developed the 23 core competency models for training for APS staff across the country. The guiding principles for research in APS, for evaluating and applying research in adult protective services, and the stages of research collaboration with APS organizations. These documents can be accessed at the website there that's given there below, and that is, I believe that is also in, oops, my bad, switching screens on over here. If you're looking at the document, I put the wrong page on here. That's actually page 7 of the document itself, and you can actually, if you have the document itself, you can. It actually is a link, and you can go straight to that link. That's there at the bottom of the PowerPoint page there. Okay.
And Paul,
any questions so far about the initial purpose and ethical basis? Yeah.
Paul, this is Andy. I put a link in the questions box to everybody where the actual program standards document is located, if anybody wants to pull it up while we talk.
Okay, good.
And it doesn't look like we have any questions yet. So.
Okay, good. Good. All right. When it comes to the document itself, getting into the meat of minimum standards, we started with program administration, and the APS program is guided by the agency mission, consistent with APS laws and regulations within your own state or local government where you work. When it comes to staff, the minimum standards simply say this: the number of staff is sufficient to serve the target population and fulfill the state mandates, state or local government mandates. A recommended ratio of supervised direct service personnel is established and regulated by that entity. A state or local government should have a recommended state ratio. That's what we're saying. Are we saying what that ratio needs to be? No, we're not. Okay, we're not going to in this document, in the minimum standards document, we're not. Now, would it be good to have that? Probably so. But as of yet, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any state that's done a caseload study or a thorough caseload study by an outside entity. We've tried to do our own, but many states have. But without something like that, it's very difficult to say this is what you really need. And it would have to be duplicated in multiple locations across the country for that to really be really valid. But it is said here that a recommended ratio does need to be set by that state or local in order to provide services to the clients. Direct service personnel are qualified by training and experience. We're going to get a lot more into training here in a minute to deliver the adult protective services. It's not a matter of just hiring someone and said, go do the job. The established training curricula minimally includes the APS core competencies or value equivalencies as identified by NAPSA. We're going to get into that very shortly. APS supervisors are qualified by training, experience, and to provide supervision. Another thing that's not actually specifically mentioned in this document, much like the 23 core competencies are mentioned, but there is training that's being developed by the master's program out in California. I think I got that name right. Lori Della Kumatics is a group there with the University of California, Irvine, working with them on specific training for supervisors and APS. It's good stuff. It's really good stuff. But supervisors obviously need to be qualified by training or experience to provide supervision in APS, is what this is saying. The established training curricula for supervisors minimally includes APS supervisors' core competencies or equivalencies as identified by NAPSA, and those will be available soon on our website as well. as the 23 core competencies are that we're going to be talking about for APS training in general. Quality assurance also needs to be addressed in minimum standards. So APS Direct Services personnel have access to knowledgeable case supervision. Provisions are made for access to subject matter experts and current research for best practice standards, and recommended or required direct service personnel to case ratios are established. Case assignments are made with consideration to complexity in that state and local entity, and the education and training of the direct service personnel. APS program data is collected, analyzed, and reported upon within that APS organization, and data is utilized for program improvements such as budgeting, resource management, etc. Okay. A case review process is standardized and consistently applied within those state and local governments administering the APS program. Okay, there it is. Service provision. Get to make sure I haven't skipped anything. When it comes to services, APS is provided with respect. APS services are provided with respect to cultural, ethnic, religious, and lifestyle choices. APS supervisors and direct service personnel are familiar with APS statutes governing their program and delivery of services accordingly. And it's consistent with the NAPsa Code of Ethics and practice guidelines that we mentioned earlier in this document. Because those guidelines and those ethical code that we mentioned earlier in the document are not this document. They are part of this document. Those weren't precursors to the minimum program standards. They are part of the minimum program standards. Administration of the APS program is guided by the agency's mission, is consistent with APS laws and regulations in its state and local government. Any questions about program administration that we've covered here?
I apologize, Andy.
What we're going to get into next is training.
Don't seem to have any questions yet. I did put up a link so everybody can see the core competency trainings if you want. It looks like when I pasted that there were some problems. I'm repasting it now.
Okay.
But yeah, no questions so far.
Well, that's really where we're going next, are those core competencies. There's 23 of them that NAPsa identified long before I came on board, and they worked for years to develop what does an APS program need when you're training your staff, okay? And so when it comes to training, NAPsa did identify the training that's needed by APS staff in order to perform these duties adequately and ethically within our different state and local governments, okay, of where we try to serve our clients. Project Master, a program of the Academy of Professional Excellence there at San Diego School of Social Work has been developed. We've been working with them. Laura Della Grammaticus, if any of you know her, I won't say what I call her on a national webinar, but she is awesome. That's a better term that she would appreciate more. I'll tell you in person what I call her if you come to the conference. She's incredible. She really has helped us over the last 3 or 4 years really complete so much of this work on getting the core competencies ready to go for all the states to have available to them. So if they need additional training and they don't have the money to develop it, they're out there for free. Now, about 7 or 8 of those 23 core competencies that are out there are web-based, and we're in the process of making sure that those too are available in a written form, PowerPoint and training manuals, etc., for those states who, at a no-cost basis for those states, so they can utilize them in their training efforts. And that's what this is saying here. The link to that is on the document itself, and of course, I believe that Andy's provided that to you as well. It's a really cool piece, what NAPsa has done over the last number of years to get those developed. Some of the things we're waiting on for some of them are approvals by the funders like Office of Victim Crime and things of that nature. But those are slowly coming in for those that we're still waiting on. Core activities. When it comes to those core activities, It includes intake, investigation, needs and risk assessment, findings, service planning and monitoring, case closure, and documentation. And from page 9 of the document through the end of the document, page 14, those are the 7 items that we're going to be talking about, okay, for the rest of the webinar. Starting with the intake, the minimum program standards that is being recommended here for us is that APS programs have a systematic method and means and ability to promptly receive and screen reports of abuse, neglect, exploitation, abuse. During the receipt of the screening and APS reports, APS programs have the responsibilities include having these things: a hotline number or other service that directly receives reports 24/7, a system for APS to be notified of all reports taken. If APS doesn't take the report, there needs to be a system set up so they can be notified of those reports that are taken. The capacity to be able to respond 24 hours a day to emergencies with trained APS personnel, and partnerships with other agencies and communities and organizations to be able to do this, potentially be available to assist in the response. Other things to consider, program responsibilities would include protection of the reporter's identity unless otherwise ordered by a court, a prompt process used to screen and investigate the reports by a supervisor, okay? I would add that, but it says a prompting process used to screen and investigate reports. An explanation to the reporter of the role of the reporter in this process and types of services or interventions that APS can provide. A review of safety and risk factors needs to be included in any intake process involving any report of abuse or neglect of a vulnerable adult. Agency's decision-making criteria to review and assign cases, to report to other authorities, initiate court action if required, and a determination as to whether a case will be screened out or referred for an alternative response or investigated by APS. So there needs to be a system put in place in order to determine that screening process and that's well documented. We get to documentation later. A process which reports are reviewed, assigned for investigation, referred to other providers, or screened out as soon as possible, but no later than 24 hours after receipt. We don't put too many numbers in here, if you've noticed, but we all know nationally a minimum standard easily needs to be this. Could some responses need to be sooner? Sure. Some could be imminently life-threatening, and your state and local governments would have to follow your state and local policy and laws on those. But these are the minimum standards that are being recommended by napsa for any state and local government if they're administering an APS program in their area. Any questions at this point about training or core intake, training core or intake questions?
Paul, this is Andy. The one question that we have at this point is the minimum standards. Do we feel like they're adequate, not stringent enough? I guess it's more of a question for the participants, really. But one thing I can say, and maybe you can speak to this, is that the standards were meant when we wrote them to be able to be implemented by just about any program that, regardless of funding and where they are in the U.S., rural or urban. Would you say that's accurate?
I'd say it's accurate, but I also know in presenting this in several regional meetings that the participants really said that would be our hope, but this document really supports our efforts in doing so, because right now we don't know that we really are. And now we have something we can point to our legislative bodies or to those that we need to address these issues with about better service in our community or state and local government, that we can say these are the minimum standards we need in order to best provide services to our clients. I think it's fair to say that it would be difficult for everyone to, at this point, to meet even these minimum standards because that's not what's available, financially available for them. This particular one, for example, does every state have the ability to respond within 24 hours after the receipt? Some may not, and it may be an issue that they need help with in their state to say, we need this ability. These are the minimum standards that programs should have. So I don't know if I really answered the question well or not, but the fact is these are minimum standards. That's part of the question was, is this everything that needs to be? Probably not. But there would be the minimum standards that would be necessary for a program to be certified or need to be, if we're ever looking at certification, which we are in the future, of a program in the country. And that hopefully will help states get to that point when they, because I don't know an APS program in the country that would not want to meet these standards.
Great, thanks, Paul.
And that's way too long-winded for me. I'm sorry. Okay. The next section is on investigations. So minimum standards for an APS investigation. Well, it's a systematic, methodical, and detailed inquiry. It's the examination of all components, circumstances, relationships pertaining to the reported situation. APS programs have a systematic method and means and ability to conduct and complete an investigation in a timely and efficient manner to determine if the reported abuse has occurred and determine if services are needed. It's important that those words are there. The words I mean are in an efficient manner and a timely manner. Because as you'll see, this goes throughout the document as we're looking at, guys, that it's not just enough to say, well, we did an investigation, but it took us a year to do it. I don't know any program that does that. So obviously, if we're presenting minimum standards to those outside of APS, they need to have these indications that they must be timely, they must be efficient, because we're dealing with, we all know, there are 78 attendees on this call right now, and every one of us know that without timeliness, we're not helping vulnerable adults or protecting them in the way APS wants to protect them, and we all know that. So that's why that's in the document itself, to help support that knowledge. APS investigation protocols would include an assessment of information received to determine potential danger to the client and how quickly investigation should be initiated. An initial assessment of potential danger to the APS worker should be included in that investigation. Preparation for a home visit. APS worker makes an announced initial visit to the home of the client at least once during the investigating process, and upon entering the premises and during the interview process responds to emergencies that may arise that relate to the safety or health of the client or the APS worker. Interviews with the reporter, the client, collateral contacts, members of the family, alleged perpetrator, others with knowledge of the situation to complete an assessment based on the initial report needs to be part of the investigating protocols. Review of the relevant documents, financial, medical records, etc. That could be bank accounts, credit cards, anything of that nature. APS programs have in place a systematic screening method, means and ability to conduct and complete a needs and risk assessment, including the client's strengths and weaknesses. The assessment needs to include criticality or the safety of the client in all the significant domains listed below. Now, when we get to the domains, you almost need to have the document itself on page 10 and 11 of the document, because I just bulleted them here, okay? But please note that unless specifically qualified or authorized by state law, an APS worker does not carry out clinical health or capacity assessments, but rather screens for indications of impaired and refers the client on to qualified professionals, physicians, neuropsychologists, etc., to administer thorough evaluations. There are some state and local entities where the APS staff does do, for example, a capacity assessment, for example. It talks about personal mental health and status and capacity. There are many that don't. So, but at some point, someone needs to, okay, in order to evaluate the needs and risk assessment of a client. So if you actually look at the document itself, when it comes to personal health and functional ability, on page 10 of the document, and I'm going to get there myself. It has 2 bullets there underneath that. It says physical health, determine emergency medical needs. That's part of that risk assessment during the investigative process, is determine any emergency medical needs that may be occurring. And the second bullet is the client's ability to perform ADLs, IDLs in order to meet their own needs. Some type of functional ability needs to be assessed in that needs and risk assessment. When it comes to personal mental health status and capacity, they're on page 10 of your document. If you actually have that pulled up, or if you printed it off yourself, there's 3 bullets under that. One of them is mental, and it says determine if need for emergency mental health treatment. Determine if there's a need for emergency mental health treatment. Look at the emotional status of the client, decision-making capacity, and ability to direct his or her own care through and that would be through executive function, for example. Under the social bullet there, it says support systems, formal and informal systems. We need to assess those. We need to assess the caregiver situation and that social status, and determine the need for immediate care in the caregiving situation for that client. Looking at behaviors under the social. Behaviors of who? The alleged perpetrator, the victim, all of those that we have contact with who have knowledge about this investigation. Okay. Going to environmental on page 11 of your document. Oh, there's one more bullet under social, and that would be interpersonal dynamics between those providing care or those in the home, or those in the place where the client lives. Environmental would include health hazards and safety hazards. Financial, the domain on that would include things in the nature of capacity to manage their own financial affairs, the appropriate uses of finances by either the client or those that are providing care, and determine immediate need to preserve assets. Those are the 3 main bullets under financial, under the financial domain. In addition to these 5 critical domains, and guys, forgive me for reading so much. I know, like, oh my gosh, if we could just see each other, it'd be we'll be able to do that if you come to the conference. I'm just saying, okay? That's so much better, because then we can see each other's faces and go, Paul, what about that? So I'm hoping you are asking some questions if you have them. I know it's hard when there's 78 of you and all you can do is type into the box. But if you do have questions about any of this, please do type them in. If we get to them on the webinar, we will. If we run out of time, then at the end of the session today, then we'll answer them after the session today. But in addition to these 5 critical domains, in the case of abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, we also need an assessment of the perpetrator. It's an additional critical task for APS workers to complete. It's in order to ascertain the risk of to the safety and independence of the vulnerable adult victim. And when conducting assessments and investigations, the APS worker needs to keep the napsa guidelines, practice guidelines in mind. That would be referring you back to page 6 of the standards document. Okay. Those guidelines. I'm going to look there real quickly, but those guidelines include, okay, the National Code of Ethics, NAPSA Code of Ethics, the guiding values, that every action taken by APS must balance the duty to protect the safety of the vulnerable with their right to self-determination, that we recognize the interests of the adult are first concerning any intervention, not those who make the report, but our clients themselves, to avoid imposing our personal values, to seek informed consent, etc. Okay, those are the guidelines we're talking about whenever we're doing any form of needs and risk assessment, and we're talking to our clients and those who have anything knowledge about the case or the incident. Any questions about the investigation and the needs and risk assessment section of the document that we've gone through here?
Paul, the question that we have that's relevant to what you talked about so far is, and I think this is in regards to the document or the program standards, does the adult need to give approval for the social worker to interview persons other than the reporter?
That's really going to be dictated by your state and local code. That's the honest truth of that. Hopefully, your state and local code will be written in a way to where you can. Because without doing a a thorough investigation, we really can't, as an APS program, provide or even talk to the client about about the needed protections for them in an informed way. That's also taking consideration do no further harm, the wrong intervention without the right intervention, even including things we'll talk about in a little bit later about safety planning, such as in the domestic violence realm, always need to be taken in consideration. But I would hope that we would hope that the minimum standards would allow APS to do a thorough investigation, a prompt and thorough investigation, because without being able to do so, we can't really help provide protective service or offer the proper protective services to our clients. But that's really is going to be dictated by the code in the entities that are providing the services where you're at. But I would certainly encourage the code to allow you to do so. Okay. That's a great question. Case findings. Interestingly enough, the original document that we looked at and tried to modify to fit these minimum program standards didn't even have case findings, and yet it was a system that was being used to evaluate some of the programs across the country, not created by APS, not created by APS entity, but independent entity. It's like, well, how do you evaluate an APS program if they don't have case findings? You do an investigation, and okay, we did an investigation. So it was a glaring missing element of minimum standards. So in the area of case findings that we have here in this document by NAPSA with the minimum standards is this: that APS programs do have a systematic method to make case determinations and a case record in the determination and record the case findings in the case. A determination must be made as to whether the abuse, neglect, self-neglect, or financial exploitation has occurred or didn't occur. The decision to substantiate the allegation is based on a careful evaluation of all the information gathered, including the intake, including the investigation, including the needs and risk assessment phases of the investigation that we've covered already so far. Okay. Now, when we talk about, and we've already talked about the sections on intake, investigation, needs and risk assessment, there's so much more out there available to all the state and local entities than just this just this 14-page document that we're looking at today. Those 23 core competencies that are out there, there are half-a-day and full-day trainings on each and every one of these, on neglect, on self-neglect, on financial exploitation, on undue influence, on decision-making capacity, on substantiation, as on the ones that we're getting to come to later on service planning, whether it be involuntary or voluntary service planning. There are individual core competencies for each and trainings available to states for every single one of these. This document tells what needs to be in place as far as that you need to have case findings. This document doesn't say how do you do that, how do you train your staff to do that, but the trainings are out there and available. Okay, and many of you are doing that already. So when it comes to case findings, any questions on the fact that we need to establish the fact that we have to have case findings in our documented in our cases? Now I know that some states, most states, I think, are still using papered versions. Some are using web-based versions or some other type of computer-based versions. But regardless of whether it's handwritten, typed, done with Word or Excel, or done on a web-based system, we've got to be able to document our case findings, our investigative procedures, our interviews, those type of things in these cases in order to be able to establish that the case findings actually were accurate. Service planning. Service planning and monitoring. The first initial guideline here, it's page 11 of the document, is that APS programs adhere to the guiding principles. We mentioned that earlier on page 6 of the document, okay? I read a couple of them to you just as a reminder about the ethical issues involved there when developing a plan of action to address the identified needs of the vulnerable adult. The protected services are offered to a client in a timely manner. But the goal of the service planning is to make the client safer. And we all know, and I'm going to see smiles right over the line here, that we all know that we've got a lot of people who call us about concerns, and they have their own agenda. They have their own service plan in mind. And it's not about the client. It's about them. Often we know that often the caller that we get about concerns about a client is often the perpetrator. Not time to do training here, but we all know that. The goal of the service plan is to make the client safer, to prevent continued abuse and improve his or her quality of life, not the person reporter, not the family member, not the code enforcement folks. And regular monitoring of the service plan through the face-to-face contact occurs as needed to pursue the continued reduction or elimination of risk of the abuse. If criminal activity is suspected, a referral is made to local law enforcement. That's important in service planning. It's important in any of our cases. If a suspected violation of state regulatory or licensing practices, licensing could be nursing, could be doctors, could be a number of other entities, is suspected, a referral is made to that appropriate agency. Okay? It needs to be a method and means to be able to do that. Respect the integrity and authority of victims to make their own choices. My wife just left me a note, guys, telling everybody across the country she's gone to get my lunch. Yay! So hopefully you got somebody getting your lunch for you too if it's lunchtime for you. I married up. Guiding principles here on service planning and monitoring. Respect the integrity and authority of the victim to make their own life choices. Hold perpetrators, not victims, accountable for the abuse. Avoid victim blaming and questions and statements like why. I'll just add that little word, one I hardly ever use anymore. Take into consideration the victim's concepts of what safety and quality of life means. That goes back to good safety planning if you're familiar with most of the domestic violence models, okay? And recognizing the resilience and honor the strategies that victims have used to protect themselves. It may not look like something that we would do, but something that they've done. And it's what keeps them safe, or is kept as safe as they think they can be, or those around them. Redefine success. Success is defined by the victim, not by us. And note, different agencies may use different terms when it comes to service planning. It may be called a case plan, it may be a safety plan, it may be an action plan, it may even be a safety plan. Okay, so in this document we're using service planning and monitoring as that term, but it could be very different, or be similar to one of these other terms in where you're at. There's 2 areas of service planning, and there's actually 2 separate trainings that's available in the 23 core competencies by napsa. One of them is voluntary service planning. This would be where the client has the cognitive facilities to make a plan, maintain a plan, help you with assessing their need for the plan, and to the, this is where we're going to respect their right to folly and their right to make bad decisions, even though wouldn't be the plan we'd make, it's their plan. Voluntary service planning would include, once the assessments are made, the worker develops the case plan with the client. Miss Bessie, here's what you're going to do. That's not with the client. In the emergencies where the client lacks capacity or cannot consent to services, then we would look at involuntary action may be necessary. In other situations when the client can consent to services, a voluntary case plan is developed with the client, keeping in mind the guiding principles and practice guidelines. We're going to look at involuntary service planning as part of this document in just a second. But in voluntary service plan, the development includes identifying with the victim the factors that influence the intervention and risk and needs. Those things that we identified that in risk and needs assessment that need to be addressed to help that client be safer. within the environment that they're at, that they wish to maintain. Engaging the victim in an ethical manner with useful strategies, making useful strategy recommendations to develop mutual goals to decrease risk of abuse. Determining with the victim and other reliable sources such as family members, friends, community partners, if they're reliable and not abusers, the appropriate interventions that would decrease the risk of the abuse. In some cases, the use of proper domestic violence safety planning is warranted. Service planning and monitoring, also, although the individual may be a victim of abuse, working with the individual requires the recognition that the individual has many positive qualities and that we have the opportunity to examine their strengths. Okay? It's important we see the victim of maltreatment as a viable, strong person with much to offer. If we don't, we'll be making the plan, not them. And that's what the minimum standards talks about when it talks about voluntary service planning. In involuntary service planning, well, that would be in emergencies that was mentioned earlier, where there's been a determination of extreme risk and the client lacks capacity. And it says determination. Well, who made that determination? It depends upon your state and local government, okay? Who makes the determination? Could be law enforcement, could be medical, could be the APS staff. But it would be whatever the code says in your state and local government as far as what is an emergency, who makes that determination of extreme risk, okay? And the client lacks capacity. We mentioned that earlier in the document about capacity assessments need to be made with our clients. Who makes that assessment? That's determined by your local state and government, okay? So, if there has been a determination of extreme risk and the client lacks capacity or cannot consent to services, involuntary action may be necessary. The decision to take involuntary action is not to be taken lightly. That's well said. And in order to provide involuntary intervention, APS needs to obtain legal standing, either by going to court with legal counsel or by involving another agency that has the legal jurisdiction to do so, and any and all court actions is well documented in the case. APS programs follow the particular laws, policies in their jurisdiction regarding involuntary services. To vulnerable adults who lack the capacity to protect themselves from maltreatment, oh, well, I put an extra pause in there, didn't I? The lack of capacity may also limit the victim's ability to engage in the decisions surrounding the identification of risk and needs, as well as the goals, intervention strategies protected from further harm. Even though involuntary service planning involves a victim of abuse who lacks capacity, working with that individual requires the recognition that the individual also has many positive qualities and, when possible, may be able to contribute to the decision-making process. Anyway, I can't help but train just a hair here, and basically what that means is, yes, they don't know the risk, they don't know their extreme risk, they don't know that they may die without the particular services that the local, state, and government and the code allows us to take involuntary action for their benefit. But that doesn't mean that if Susie is going to go to a nursing home based in that jurisdiction, based on that code, based on the policies and procedures of that, in order for her to live, there may be 2 nursing homes in your community, and Susie is there one that you don't want to go to? Well, I don't go to any of them. Or is there any one in particular that you'd rather go to or not go to? Well, I certainly don't want to go to that one because that's where my dad died. Okay? Well, even if they don't have capacity, this is the type of issue that we're talking about, that when possible, they still may be able to contribute to the decision-making process of where Susie ends up at. That's an example of what we're talking about here. And I'm sorry I digressed, but I think most of us understand that. But you go, well, why would we even include them in the decision-making process if they don't have capacity? Because it could still be harmful if we don't. Involuntary service planning, once the screening assessments indicates the client may lack capacity, a case plan is developed that addresses the risk needs identified in the assessments, and a formal process should be in place in your local state and local government that addresses APS to determine when involuntary intervention may be indicated. It needs to identify those situations where the client's immediate safety takes precedent over the client's right to self-determination, and it needs to be able to explore the ethical issues and the worker's decision to use involuntary intervention. Document document any information needed to justify the use of involuntary intervention. And involuntary service planning needs to include the identity and appropriate services needed to be able to implement an involuntary case plan, and to develop and defend an involuntary intervention plan. That needs to be part of the involuntary service planning. And the last one there is have in place a systematic method to continue to provide protective services to those clients who are being provided involuntary protective services in your state and local government. The last note here is that voluntary or involuntary service plans are monitored, and that changes can be made with the client's involvement to facilitate services to address any identified shortfalls of the original service plan or newly identified needs and risks that weren't present before, and the case plan will include an arrangement of essential services as defined in statute or policy. In some jurisdictions this is called follow-up. In some jurisdictions this is just called service planning, ongoing service planning. We all have our own terminology for that. Any questions about service planning at this point?
Paul, this is Andy. I'm not sure if it's really
Yes,
under service planning or not, but there was a question about capacity screening tools. I remember when we went over the program standards, I don't think that's a specific area that we tried to address, but I'll let you speak to that.
Okay. There are a number of screening tools out there, and obviously what this says, the minimum standards is that a client's capacity needs to be assessed. How you assess it needs to be established in your state and local government by the entities that govern your APS program. It also has to be done in the capacity training module that NAPsa has created. There are some tools that are there that are available. Most people nationally use many of these tools. As professionals, if you do have screening tools available, you need to know what those screening tools actually screen for. Most of the tools out there do not screen for capacity. I don't know of any one that does. And you go, well, yes, we do. Well, actually, most of them screen for memory, short-term, long-term, and that's a good thing. That does help in the capacity assessment. They may be able to screen for, there are a few out there that do some minor screening for executive function or for dementia. There are a few out there that are really good at screening for executive function. But those tools need to be established and how those tools are used and what they actually assess needs to be understood and trained very well. Is when APS staff are screening for capacity, even if they do not do the capacity assessments. Obviously, when we go to the home, we need to be able to know: are there risks here? Are there potential risks here? Are there indications of memory loss that would affect a person's capacity? Are there indications of lack of executive function, not be able to make a decision or maintain a decision that would put that person at extreme risk or at higher risk? And the screening tools are very necessary, but each state and local government would need to establish those that they wish to use. Okay.
Paul, there was also a question a little bit earlier about alternative response. I'm not sure if that's a term that you're familiar with or not. I had to ask some questions about it, but I wasn't sure if we addressed that anywhere in the standards. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, are we talking about on the intake? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, it sounds like when APS is not accepting the case for investigation.
Yeah, that's going to be really based on your state or local government's code about who's required to respond to. I'm going to go stay back where we were, and I'll go look at the document itself. Sorry about that. Sorry about clicking through here, guys. But yeah, on the document it talks about if APS isn't the person that needs to respond, there needs to be a system in place to determine who should. if APS is going to screen something out as an investigation, is there still another local entity that would be responsible for that particular allegation of a situation with involving a doctor or a dentist or a nurse or a caregiver of a professional caregiver of some type? If APS isn't required specifically to investigate those, who would be? And there does need to be a system in place, procedure in place to be able to notify those, because otherwise, now that's the minimum standards. There needs to be the ability for someone to respond 24/7. And I don't know that I answered the question well. If not, then please let us know. We can surely talk offline, or we can respond through an emails to better respond if we did not answer that question well. Okay, so I'm not real sure that we have, and I hope we have, but I'm not sure that we have.
Paul, I just asked a question of the audience too to type to let us know if they feel like that there's any areas that we should develop better within the program standards, or things that we should address that we haven't already. Go on ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, and that's something that's. I'm glad you mentioned that, Andy, because guys, there are now 78 of you out there on this call. And this is a live document. This is not, okay, this is written in stone, and Moses has brought it down from the mountains, and there ain't no changing. Obviously, it was well thought out. Obviously, it was 21 months was spent by professionals, APS professionals across the country, and obviously guided by our practice standards and our ethical standards that NAPSA spent years developing. Sure, open to discussion and open to any recommendations, even though there's a lot here that we haven't talked about, that we talked about in the committees for 21 months, that you may say this or this and this is this. Yeah, we thought about that, and here's why. And even if you have recommendations that we had thought considered, we can at least respond to those. And you may come up with a recommendation that we hadn't considered that does need to be included in the minimum standards. And so please do give us your input on that. That would be great. We know this document will not stay exactly like it is for the next 3 or 4, 5, 6 years. It will not stay static. There will be changes made. If something needs to be adjusted and changed for minimum standards for programs. So that's a great question. I think we're now on case closure, and which is the final section. No, next to the final section of the document standard, of the minimum standards document. Case closure. APS programs have a systematic method to complete a case closure. That the goal of the intervention of APS is reduced or eliminated, that risk was somehow ameliorated or eliminated to some degree, that the abuse, neglect of the adult, that once the goal is met, the case could be closed. The case closure follows the law, policy of each jurisdiction, and the case record should contain documentation of APS's interventions, their outcomes, and assessment of their efficacy, and the reason for the decision to close the case. The next part of case closure talks about, although programs may have different standards for case termination, the conditions are fairly common for most and should be detailed to the exact circumstances for each in order to meet the program standards. Some reasons could include the allegations substantiated or unsubstantiated. Terms may vary upon your jurisdiction. Off the top of my head, I can't think of another terminology used for that, but I'm sure there are some in other jurisdictions other than substantiated or unsubstantiated. Risk were ameliorated or reduced. The fact that case was closed because the client could not be located. Client with capacity refused the services. Client referred to another agency could be an example. Client was placed in a safe environment, for example. Client deceased. Those would be some examples of some reasons to include in case closure. When a client case closure would be also could be when a client requests the service to be discontinued or fails to participate in the services. The APS worker evaluates the plan, that the goal remains consistent with the individual's wants and needs, and if the resources needed to reduce the risk are not available, it should be documented in the case, as well as what was done in that circumstance. Any questions about case closure?
We don't have any questions right now, Paul.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Time-wise, we've got about, what, how much minutes left? We're getting really good. We're getting really close here. Looks like we got about, what, 20 minutes left or so?
About 20 minutes left, yep.
Okay. This is the final section on the documentation, and on the document about documentation. Obviously, one paragraph, one page on documentation. Obviously, this is minimum standards. The APS programs need to have, must have. They really, you said that we got away from must or should, but it is implied. But there needs to be a systematic method of documenting the entire case process, from intake to investigation to risk assessments to capacity assessments or at least capacity screenings to service planning, voluntary and involuntary, to case closure, and of course documentation has to do with all of that. The values, the importance of clear, concise, accurate, and fact-based case documentation. The training section, if you haven't seen it, the training that's available on documentation through the 23 core, one of the 23 core competency models that NAPS has created, it's really quite incredible. It is a full day of training, and I'm going to tweak your interest, I hope, by mentioning the fact that in that training there is an exercise called rat feces. Yep, it's called rat feces. That's the exercise. Now go look for it. It's really cool. Okay, it's just really cool. By far one of my favorite exercises, and just about anybody I know who trains these once they've seen it goes, okay, that's really, really good. And you go, what? You got to look at it. You're gonna have to go find it to be able to know what that is. No, we're not training people how to identify rat feces. Okay, but it is all about documentation, and it's a really great exercise, including that 7 hours of training. But it's important that we be clear and concise, and that particular piece has to do with being clear and concise, being accurate, fact-based. And the rat feces exercise is a really cool way of demonstrating that. That's a good advertisement for you all to look at some of the training that's available to you for free from NAPSA. The values accuracy, objectivity, and unbiased documentation of diverse cultures, lifestyles, and needs in case recording and preparation of the reports. Documentation shows that respects and acknowledges the time frames necessary for the preparation and submission of the case documentation and reports to the supervisor to allow sufficient time for review in conformance with mandate timeliness for completion of required task, because most of us have time frame guidelines in our, for documentation. It clearly supports the case findings, and documentation includes a confidentiality statement per the program's rules and regulations. Okay, that is a complete look at the APS, NAPSA APS minimum program standards. The idea here, guys, there's a question here. Any questions about the documentation questions, and I'll let Andy give those to me if there are any. But my question is, how do you see your state or local, or my mistype, how do you see your state or local government utilizing this information? That's the question I would have. Any questions on documentation, Andy?
No, it doesn't look like we had another request for the project master link, which I'll send out to the audience.
Okay, good. Somebody's going to go look for rat feces. Good for you. That's not the only excellent exercise in that training. There's some wonderful ones in that training about what is subjective versus unsubjective. Really good training there. I really want to thank you all. I really do want you to think about how do you see your state and local government utilizing this? Any feedback on that from you guys? I mean, there's still 74 of you on the call. We've had 7 leave the call, and that's all right because we have completed the document. But how do you see you or your folks using this information? And thank you guys for being on the call today. I would love to see you at the conference. I know we all would. So many of these folks that contributed to this document, the committee, many of them will be there, and we would love to talk to you about it. Many of these folks that helped with this document are much smarter than I am. They gave me this big blow up at the beginning of this. Thank you, Kathleen. But there are some incredible folks across this country, many of you on this call, that are doing incredible work. And we look to working with you and on this and other projects in the future. So if we can help you or if you can help us, let us know. Okay?
All right, and if anyone has questions, you're welcome to email us after the webinar's over with. Info@napsanow.org, or you can just go to our website, www.napsanow.org, and there's a contact form on there which you can use to get a hold of us.
This is Kathleen. We really hope these will be helpful to you in your state and local programs, that you can use these as a tool, as an education thing to help other people realize what APS does, doesn't do, to take to your funders, your legislators, county council, all that kind of stuff. So we really want it to work for you. We created it for you. So, and as Andy and Paul said, any questions, any comments, any suggestions, we really want to hear them.
You've been very well behaved. I didn't allow talking or anything. Oh, they couldn't talk.
That's right. That's right. And they're exceptionally quiet for a group of APS people.
Well, I do appreciate everybody being on the call. I don't know where y'all are from. I see Brad Parks and Brenda, Christine Johnson, and so many others here. I don't know where you're from. Oh, there's Alana. Alana is on the call. She is one of our friends from Canada. I do see that.
Well, we've got Hennepin County, Minnesota, Arizona, New Jersey, Alabama, Hawaii, Kansas, North Carolina, Indiana, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
I thought that was Hawaii. I thought I recognized that one name. That's awesome.
Another Indiana, Montgomery County, Maryland, all kinds of people. More Kansas. There's a lot of, several people from different states. Lots of North Carolina people.
Cool.
Good for you. Wyoming,
very cool.
Nevada, California. Yep. Lots of duplicates, so I'm not going to read all those off. But no,
well, I'm
really
glad you guys are on the call. That's great, guys. Really great. Please let us hear from you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Please come up to us at the conference. Thank you, guys.
The webinar's been recorded, and we'll make the slides available as well. We'll send the link to the slides and the recorded webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.